Ma'am, first class isn't for people like you. The sentence cut through the cabin so sharply that even passengers wearing noise-canceling headphones glanced up from their screens. Flight 728 to Los Angeles was supposed to leave at 7:40 p.m. from Gate B14 at O'Hare International Airport. The boarding process was nearly complete. Overhead bins were closing. Seat belts were clicking. The familiar rhythm of another routine flight filled the air. Then everything changed around Seat 2A. Naomi Brooks sat quietly by the window. She wore dark jeans, white sneakers, and a simple charcoal sweater. No designer logos. No jewelry worth mentioning. No signs that she was one of the most powerful executives in American aviation. She looked out toward the runway lights shimmering beyond the glass while holding a paperback book in her lap. Calm, relaxed, unbothered. Across the aisle stood Victoria Sinclair, a well-known social media personality, traveling with premium status and an attitude that seemed even larger than her online following. Her expensive luggage had already been stored. Her champagne sat untouched on the tray table. Yet her attention remained fixed on Naomi. "There has to be some mistake," Victoria said loudly enough for several rows to hear. "That seat can't be hers." A few passengers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Others pretended not to notice. The flight attendant nearest the row, Nicole Harper, stepped forward wearing a polite smile that somehow felt colder than silence. "May I see your boarding pass again, ma'am?" she asked Naomi. It was the second time in 10 minutes. Naomi looked up slowly and handed it over without complaint. Nicole examined it. The scanner had already approved it at the gate. The seat assignment clearly showed 2A. Everything was valid. Yet the attendant hesitated. "Just a moment," Nicole said. Victoria folded her arms. "Exactly," she replied. "I knew it." Naomi remained seated. She neither argued nor defended herself. That composure seemed to bother Victoria more than anything. The cabin atmosphere tightened. Conversations faded. Even the low hum of the aircraft seemed distant. A businessman across the aisle lowered his laptop. A young mother paused while helping her son with a coloring book. Everyone sensed something was wrong. Nicole returned the boarding pass, but did not walk away. "Are you sure you're in the correct seat?" she asked. Naomi's expression never changed. "That's what the ticket says." Victoria laughed softly. Unbelievable. The words carried the weight of an assumption nobody wanted to say aloud. Naomi had heard that tone before. Many times. In hotels. In executive meetings. In private clubs. In places where people decided she didn't belong before learning her name. Yet she stayed perfectly still. The stillness was almost unsettling. It was the kind of calm that appears when someone has absolutely nothing to prove. Victoria shook her head and looked toward nearby passengers as if seeking approval. Some people just don't know when they're out of place. A murmur spread through first class. Nobody openly agreed. Nobody openly challenged her either. The plane doors were still open. Flight attendants continued moving through the aisle. Outside, the last bags were being loaded beneath the wing. Everything suggested departure was only minutes away. But near Seat 2A, another journey had already begun. One built on assumptions, pride, and a mistake so enormous that before the night was over, the aircraft itself would never leave the ground. 22 minutes earlier, before the tension settled over first class like a storm cloud nobody could see, Naomi Brooks had walked through Gate B14 completely alone. No assistance. No security detail. No designer luggage announcing status. Just a small black carry-on rolling quietly behind her across the polished airport floor. Travelers rushed around her carrying coffees, checking phones, chasing boarding groups, and preparing for another ordinary evening flight to Los Angeles. Nobody stopped. Nobody stared. Nobody recognized the woman who had spent the last decade helping reshape one of the largest aviation investment portfolios in the country. That was exactly how Naomi preferred it. She reached the boarding scanner and handed over her pass. The gate agent smiled politely when the screen flashed green. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Brooks." Naomi returned the smile and continued down the jet bridge. The narrow corridor vibrated faintly beneath her feet from the aircraft systems already running. The familiar scent of jet fuel drifted through the air. For most passengers, this was just transportation. For Naomi, it was research. 3 months earlier, a series of customer complaints had crossed her desk. Most were dismissed by managers as misunderstandings. A few described something deeper. Travelers being questioned repeatedly despite valid tickets. Customers treated differently based on appearance. Passengers quietly embarrassed in premium cabins. The reports bothered Naomi because they shared the same pattern. Different airports, different crews, same outcome. She wanted answers that spreadsheets could not provide. So she booked the ticket herself. Real name, real payment, no special notice, no executive alert attached to the reservation. She wanted to see what happened when nobody knew who she was. As she stepped into first class, flight attendant Nicole Harper greeted boarding passengers with a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard." Naomi nodded and found seat 2A. The cabin was calm then. Soft lighting reflected from polished surfaces. Empty seats waited for their occupants. Outside the window, baggage vehicles moved beneath the fading Chicago sunset. Naomi settled into her seat and opened a paperback she had been trying to finish for weeks. For a while, everything seemed normal. A businessman stored a briefcase in the overhead bin. A retired couple discussed vacation plans. A college student upgraded with reward points stared excitedly at every detail of the cabin. Nothing felt unusual. Then Naomi noticed Nicole looking toward her more than once. Not a greeting, not curiosity, evaluation. The same kind of look Naomi had encountered countless times throughout her life. She recognized it instantly because it never truly changed. At 23, a luxury hotel clerk assumed her corporate credit card belonged to someone else. At 28, a real estate broker asked if she was attending a meeting or cleaning afterward. At 36, a conference organizer directed her toward the service entrance moments before she delivered the keynote address. Different faces. Same assumption. Naomi turned a page and kept reading. She had learned long ago that people often revealed themselves when they believed nobody was paying attention. A few minutes later, Nicole walked by again and glanced at the boarding pass resting beside Naomi's book. Then she glanced a second time. The look lasted barely a moment, but Naomi noticed. She always noticed. The plane continued filling. More passengers boarded. More conversations filled the air. Then a woman carrying a designer handbag stopped beside row 2, looked directly at Naomi, and frowned as though she had discovered something that did not belong. Her name was Victoria Sinclair, and from the instant her eyes settled on seat 2A, the evening began moving toward a collision none of them would forget. Victoria Sinclair remained standing in the aisle long after other passengers had taken their seats. Her expression carried the certainty of someone accustomed to getting agreement before asking for it. She glanced toward Naomi again, then toward Nicole Harper, as though expecting the flight attendant to solve a problem that existed only in her imagination. "I am sorry," Victoria said loudly, "but I paid a lot of money for first class. I would like to know why there is confusion about seating." Several heads turned. Nicole forced a professional smile. "There is no confusion, ma'am." Yet even as she said it, her eyes drifted back toward Naomi. Victoria noticed. "Then why have you checked her ticket multiple times?" The question hung in the air. Nicole hesitated for half a second. It was enough. Passengers began paying closer attention. Naomi remained seated by the window, her book still open. She did not look up. She did not join the conversation. The calm seemed to frustrate Victoria even more. "Interesting," Victoria said. "Very interesting." Across the aisle, a middle-aged passenger named Daniel Foster quietly lowered his tablet. 2 rows behind, a young woman named Emma Collins listened carefully from her jump seat. Emma was a trainee flight attendant working one of her first premium cabin assignments. Unlike most people in the cabin, she recognized something familiar about the name printed on the passenger manifest earlier that evening. She could not place it yet, but it lingered in the back of her mind. Nicole stepped closer to Naomi. "Ma'am, would you mind confirming your destination?" Naomi looked up slowly. "Los Angeles. And this is your assigned seat?" "According to the boarding pass you already verified twice." The answer was polite, direct, unmistakable. A few passengers exchanged glances. Victoria folded her arms. "See? That attitude." Nobody responded. The silence weakened her position more than any argument could have. Outside the aircraft, the final service vehicles moved away from the gate. Inside, however, the atmosphere continued growing heavier. Nicole checked her tablet again. Everything matched. Everything was correct. Yet she seemed unwilling to let the matter go. "One moment," she said before walking toward the galley. Victoria followed her several feet. Their voices dropped lower, but not low enough. "Are you absolutely sure?" Victoria whispered. People get into the wrong cabins, all the time. Nicole did not answer immediately. That answer alone was revealing. Emma watched the exchange from a distance. Something felt wrong. Professional procedure had already been completed. The seat assignment was valid. The discussion should have ended minutes ago. Instead, it kept expanding like a crack spreading across glass. Back at seat 2A, Naomi turned another page in her book. Her composure seemed almost impossible under the circumstances. Daniel finally leaned across the aisle. "For what it is worth," he said quietly, "you seem to be handling this better than most people would." Naomi offered a small smile. "Experience helps." Before Daniel could respond, Nicole returned from the galley carrying a more serious expression. Victoria followed close behind. The plane remained at the gate. The doors remained open. But the mood inside first class had shifted completely. People were no longer preparing for departure. They were waiting to see what would happen next. Emma Collins could not shake the feeling that she had seen the name before. As the cabin settled into an uneasy silence, she quietly opened the crew tablet assigned to trainee staff and reviewed the passenger manifest once more. Naomi Brooks. The name sat there exactly where it had earlier. Valid ticket. Confirmed payment. First class seat 2A. No flags. No issues. No special instructions. Yet somehow the entire front cabin seemed to be revolving around her presence. Emma glanced toward Naomi. The woman had returned to her book as if none of this concerned her. That calm was becoming impossible to ignore. Most passengers would have demanded answers by now. Some would have argued. Others would have called supervisors. Naomi did none of those things. She simply sat there, composed and observant, allowing everyone else to reveal themselves. Across the aisle, Daniel Foster watched the situation unfold with growing discomfort. He had flown more than 1,000,000 miles over the course of his career and had seen enough airport drama to recognize when something was wrong. This was wrong, not because of a seating dispute. There was no dispute. The documents had already confirmed that. Something else was driving the tension now, something nobody wanted to name directly. Near the galley, Victoria Sinclair continued speaking quietly with Nicole Harper. Their conversation stopped each time another crew member walked by. Their expressions said enough. They were not discussing procedures anymore. They were discussing Naomi herself. Emma felt her stomach tighten. Training manuals covered safety, customer service, and conflict resolution. None of them authorized what she was witnessing. She finally approached Nicole. "Excuse me," Emma said carefully. "I checked the manifest again. Everything appears correct." Nicole's eyes narrowed. "I did not ask you to check the manifest." Emma hesitated. "I just thought it might help." "Then stop thinking and focus on your assigned responsibilities." The response landed harder than Emma expected. Several nearby passengers heard it. Nicole immediately turned away. The conversation was over. But the damage was done. Daniel had heard every word. So had a woman seated in row 3 named Rebecca Morgan. She exchanged a glance with her husband. Neither looked impressed. Back at seat 2A, Naomi slowly closed her book and placed it in the seat pocket. The movement caught Emma's attention. Their eyes met briefly. Naomi offered a small, reassuring smile, as though she were comforting Emma instead of the other way around. That smile unsettled Emma even more. It suggested Naomi understood exactly what was happening and had seen it before. A few minutes later, another realization struck her. Earlier that month, she had attended an internal training presentation about leadership in the aviation industry. One slide had featured influential executives whose investments were reshaping airline operations nationwide. A photograph flashed through her memory. She could not remember the entire presentation. She could not remember every name. But she suddenly remembered the face. Her pulse quickened. She looked back toward Naomi, then back at the manifest, then toward Nicole. The pieces were beginning to fit together. Emma was not completely certain yet, but she was certain enough to know one thing. Everyone in first class was focused on the wrong question. The question was never whether Naomi Brooks belonged in seat 2A. The real question was whether anyone on that aircraft understood who was sitting there. And with every passing minute, the answer seemed increasingly unlikely. The longer the delay continued, the more uncomfortable first class became. What had started as whispered assumptions now felt like a courtroom without a judge. Passengers were no longer reading magazines or scrolling through phones. They were watching people, watching reactions, watching choices. Nicole Harper stood near the galley pretending to review departure information. but her attention kept returning to Naomi Brooks. Victoria Sinclair remained planted near row 2, unwilling to let the matter go. "I still do not understand why this has become so complicated," she said loudly. "If everything is legitimate, why does this feel so strange?" Nobody answered. The silence that followed was heavier than criticism. Daniel Foster leaned back in his seat and shook his head slightly. Rebecca Morgan folded her arms. Even passengers who had said nothing were beginning to look less convinced by Victoria and more concerned by her persistence. Naomi remained composed. She glanced through the window at the blinking runway lights stretching into the Chicago night. For a brief moment, the reflection in the glass carried her somewhere else. 28 years earlier. A different airport. A different gate. She was 16 years old, dressed carefully for a youth leadership conference. Her mother had saved for months to send her. Naomi still remembered the excitement she felt walking into the premium waiting area after earning the scholarship that paid for the trip. Then came the questions. "Are you sure you belong here? Who are you waiting for? Can you show proof again?" The adults around her had watched quietly. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody challenged the assumptions. She remembered sitting alone afterward, feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her life. Not because someone questioned her ticket, because they questioned her presence. That memory never disappeared. It became fuel. Fuel for long nights in college. Fuel for business deals. Fuel for every obstacle she refused to let define her. The reflection faded as Naomi returned to the present. The aircraft cabin looked different, but the feeling was familiar. Across from her, Victoria released a frustrated sigh. "I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking." This time Daniel spoke. "No, you were saying what you were thinking." The words landed immediately. Several passengers nodded. Victoria's expression tightened. She had expected support. Instead, she found resistance. Near the galley, Emma Collins finally gathered the courage to act. She approached Nicole once more. "I remember where I know her from," Emma said quietly. Nicole barely looked up. "This is not the time." "I think it is exactly the time." Nicole's eyes narrowed. "Return to your station." Emma hesitated. Then she stepped back. But she was no longer uncertain. The face from the leadership presentation was the same face sitting in seat 2A. She was sure of it now. Meanwhile, the captain's voice came through the cabin speakers with a routine update about departure timing. The announcement should have reassured everyone. Instead, it highlighted the growing tension. The aircraft was still parked. The doors were still open. The atmosphere felt suspended between motion and standstill. Naomi reached into her bag and removed her phone. The movement caught Emma's attention immediately. It caught Daniel's too. Naomi looked at the screen for several seconds, then selected a contact. Her expression never changed. Calm, focused, certain. As the call connected, nobody around her realized they were seconds away from a decision that would reach far beyond seat 2A, far beyond first class, and far beyond the aircraft itself. The call connected on the second ring. Naomi Brooks held the phone to her ear and spoke so quietly that only a few nearby passengers could hear her. "Rachel, activate Blackbird." There was no greeting, no explanation. Just 4 words delivered with the confidence of someone who expected action, not discussion. On the other end of the line, Rachel Monroe answered immediately. "Confirmed. Blackbird is active." Naomi ended the call and placed the phone back into her lap. That was all. No dramatic speech. No threats. No attempt to convince anyone in the cabin of anything. Yet something about the exchange changed the atmosphere around seat 2A. Daniel Foster noticed it first. The conversation had been too short for customer service, too precise for a personal call. Across the aisle, Rebecca Morgan noticed it too. Victoria Sinclair did not. She remained focused on winning an argument that nobody else seemed interested in having. "There," Victoria said, gesturing toward Naomi. "Now she is calling someone because she knows there is a problem." Naomi simply looked out the window. The response irritated Victoria more than any insult could have. Near the galley, Emma Collins felt her pulse quicken as another memory surfaced. During the leadership presentation she attended weeks earlier, one executive had been mentioned repeatedly. An investor known for auditing companies from the inside. An executive famous for appearing unannounced and evaluating culture firsthand. The presentation included a photograph. The same calm eyes. The same composed expression. Emma knew now. She was certain. Naomi Brooks was not merely a passenger. Emma stepped toward Nicole Harper once again. "I need to tell you something." Nicole sighed. Not now. Yes, now. Nicole turned sharply. Emma, enough. But Emma refused to back down. I know who she is. For the first time all evening, Nicole looked uncertain. What are you talking about? Emma lowered her voice. I think she is connected to corporate leadership. Nicole's expression hardened again. You think? I am almost certain. Nicole glanced toward Naomi and then shook her head. Stay in your lane. The words ended the discussion, but they did not erase the doubt. Minutes passed. Then another. Outside the aircraft, baggage operations had already finished. Ground crews began clearing equipment from the area around the plane. Everything appeared ready for departure. Inside the cabin, however, invisible gears had started turning. 2 states away, in a glass-walled conference room overlooking downtown Dallas, Rachel Monroe entered a secure meeting line. Legal advisors joined. Operations executives joined. Human resources specialists joined. Passenger service directors joined. Nobody asked why the emergency protocol had been activated. Naomi Brooks rarely used it. When she did, people listened. Documents were opened. Flight information appeared on screens. Crew assignments were reviewed. Customer service records were pulled. Meanwhile, back on the aircraft, nobody in first class knew any of this was happening. They only knew the plane remained parked. Victoria checked her watch and frowned. Nicole refreshed her tablet repeatedly. Daniel observed quietly. Emma watched Naomi. And Naomi remained exactly as she had been from the beginning. Calm, patient, unshaken. Then a notification appeared on Nicole Harper's device. Her expression changed immediately. She opened the message. Read it once, then read it again. The color slowly drained from her face. Nearby, another crew member received a similar notification and stared at the screen in confusion. Something was happening beyond the aircraft. Something large. And for the first time that evening, the people who had questioned Naomi Brooks were no longer looking at her with suspicion. They were looking at their screens with concern. Nicole Harper stared at the notification as if the words might change if she looked long enough. They did not. The message came directly from corporate operations. A second notification appeared moments later, marked urgent. Then a third. Around her, other crew devices began chiming quietly. The sounds were small, but together they created a ripple of unease moving through the front cabin. Victoria Sinclair noticed the change immediately. What is going on? She asked. Nobody answered. Nicole's attention remained locked on the screen. The aircraft doors were still open. The jet bridge remained attached. Departure clearance had not been issued. Something had interrupted the normal sequence. Something important. Across the aisle, Daniel Foster watched the crew exchange nervous glances. In 20 years of business travel, he had learned to recognize the difference between routine delays and executive intervention. This looked like executive intervention. Emma Collins felt her heart racing. The realization she had reached earlier no longer felt like a theory. It felt like certainty. She opened the leadership presentation stored on her phone and quickly scrolled through archived training materials. There it was. A photograph. The same calm expression. The same face sitting quietly beside the window in seat 2A. Emma inhaled sharply. Naomi Brooks was not simply connected to aviation leadership. She was one of the most influential investors in the industry. Through Apex Aerospace Holdings, she helped oversee billions of dollars in aviation assets, partnerships, and strategic investments. Emma lowered the phone slowly. Everything suddenly made sense. The unusual confidence. The silence. The refusal to argue. Naomi had never been trying to prove she belonged there. She already knew she did. Near the front of the cabin, Nicole received an incoming call from corporate headquarters. Her hand trembled slightly as she answered. This is Harper. The voice on the other end spoke for less than 30 seconds. Nicole did not interrupt once. When the call ended, she remained frozen. Victoria stepped closer. Well, Nicole looked at her, but seemed unable to find the words. Finally, she turned toward Naomi. For the first time that evening, there was no suspicion in her expression. No judgment. No assumption. Only concern. Naomi met her gaze calmly. Then her phone rang. She answered immediately. Rachel. The reply came through the speaker clearly enough for nearby passengers to hear. The review team is active. Operations has completed the preliminary assessment. Executive leadership has been informed. They are requesting your authorization for the next phase. Several passengers exchanged confused looks. Executive leadership. Authorization. The language did not sound like customer service. Naomi nodded once. Proceed. Rachel answered without hesitation. Understood. The call ended. Silence followed. Then Emma stepped forward before fear could stop her. Ma'am, she said carefully, I know who you are. Every eye in first class turned toward her. Naomi looked up. Emma swallowed hard. You are Naomi Brooks, Chief Executive Officer of Apex Aerospace Holdings. The cabin went completely still. Even Victoria stopped talking. Daniel Foster leaned forward. Rebecca Morgan covered her mouth in disbelief. Nicole closed her eyes briefly as the full weight of the evening settled over her. Naomi did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply looked around the cabin and spoke in the same calm voice she had used from the beginning. The problem was never whether I belonged in this seat. The words settled over first class like a verdict. The problem was how quickly some people decided that I did not. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The revelation seemed to drain the energy from the entire cabin. Victoria Sinclair stared at Naomi Brooks as though the world had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. Nicole Harper looked down at her tablet again, hoping the facts might somehow be different. They were not. Another corporate notification arrived. Then another. The messages were no longer requests. They were directives. Immediate review. Preservation of records. Suspension of normal reporting channels. Every instruction carried the same priority level. Around the cabin, passengers exchanged looks of disbelief. Daniel Foster let out a slow breath. Well, he said quietly, that explains a lot. Rebecca Morgan nodded. It explains everything. Naomi remained seated. She showed no sign of satisfaction. No sign of anger. If anything, she looked disappointed. That disappointment seemed to affect Nicole more than any criticism could have. The flight attendant stepped forward carefully. Ms. Brooks, she began. I think there has been a misunderstanding. Naomi met her eyes. A misunderstanding happens once. The words were calm. Precise. Repeated assumptions are something else. Nicole had no response. Near the galley, Emma Collins watched silently. She had expected relief after speaking up. Instead, she felt sadness. The situation never should have reached this point. A few minutes earlier, a valid ticket should have ended the conversation. Respect should have ended it even sooner. Suddenly, the cabin speakers activated. This time, it was not the captain delivering a routine update. The message came directly from airline operations. The voice was formal, careful. Every word sounded reviewed by lawyers before being spoken. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. Flight operations have temporarily paused departure pending an internal review. Additional instructions will follow shortly. The announcement lasted less than 20 seconds. Its impact lasted much longer. A wave of murmurs spread through first class. Internal review. Not weather. Not maintenance. Not air traffic. Internal review. Victoria's confidence disappeared completely. Surely this cannot be because of one conversation, she said. Nobody answered. Deep down, even she no longer believed her own argument. Naomi's phone rang again. She answered immediately. Rachel Monroe's voice carried a new level of urgency. The executive committee has completed the preliminary assessment. They have authorized a full cultural compliance review. They are also requesting guidance regarding the flight crew involved. Naomi looked toward the front galley. Nicole stood frozen. Other crew members avoided eye contact. Emma remained still. Protect the people who tried to do the right thing, Naomi said. Review the actions of everyone else. Rachel responded instantly. Understood. The call ended. Moments later, crew devices began receiving new notifications. Nicole looked at hers and closed her eyes. Her access privileges had been temporarily restricted pending investigation. Similar messages appeared on other screens. Nobody was terminated. Nobody was publicly humiliated. But accountability had arrived. Quiet. Immediate. Irreversible. The cabin felt different now. The assumptions that had dominated the evening were gone. In their place stood consequences. Real ones. And as passengers looked around first class, many realized the most important lesson of the night had nothing to do with titles, wealth, or executive power. It was about how people are treated before anyone knows who they are. The next announcement arrived 15 minutes later. By then, nobody in first class was asking when the flight would leave. They were asking whether it would leave at all. The answer came quietly. The captain's voice carried none of the confidence passengers usually expected before departure. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been instructed to suspend this flight pending a corporate review. We apologize for the inconvenience. Additional accommodations will be provided. A stunned silence spread through the cabin. Then came the realization. The aircraft was not going anywhere. Not tonight. Not until the review was complete. Daniel Foster leaned back and let out a slow whistle. Rebecca Morgan shook her head in disbelief. Even passengers who had not followed the entire situation understood they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Victoria Sinclair stared out the window, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The certainty she had carried all evening had vanished completely. Nicole Harper remained near the galley, holding a device that now displayed restricted access notices and compliance instructions. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody celebrated. The moment felt too serious for that. Naomi Brooks stood from seat 2A and picked up her carry-on bag. The movement drew every eye in the cabin, yet her expression remained unchanged. Calm, measured, focused. She looked first toward Emma Collins. "Thank you for speaking when it would have been easier to stay silent." Emma swallowed hard and nodded. The words meant more to her than any promotion ever could. Naomi then turned toward the rest of the cabin. "This review is not happening because someone questioned me." Her voice carried clearly through first class. "It is happening because assumptions were allowed to replace professionalism." Nobody interrupted. Nobody disagreed. She continued. "The problem was never whether I could afford this seat. The problem was how quickly some people decided I could not." Several passengers lowered their eyes. Others nodded slowly. The truth of it settled over the cabin like a final piece of the puzzle. Naomi glanced toward the window one last time. The runway lights still stretched into the distance, waiting for aircraft that would actually depart. This one would not. Not tonight. Rachel Monroe called again. "Transportation and accommodations have been arranged. The executive committee is ready to begin the full review first thing in the morning." Naomi smiled faintly. "Good. Make sure it focuses on systems, not headlines." "Already done," Rachel replied. The call ended. As passengers slowly prepared to deplane, Daniel stood and extended his hand. "For what it is worth, thank you." Naomi shook it politely. "For what?" Daniel asked. Naomi looked around the cabin. "For paying attention." A few minutes later, she stepped into the jet bridge and disappeared into the flow of airport traffic, looking no different from any other traveler. No cameras followed her. No reporters waited outside. The people remaining behind would remember something far more important than her title. They would remember the lesson. Respect should never depend on a job title, a bank account, a seat assignment, or the assumptions made from across an aisle. Real character appears when nobody important seems to be watching. And on a night when one aircraft never left the gate, an entire cabin learned that dignity is not something people earn after proving who they are. It is something they deserve before anyone asks.